Good morning, friends. Today we are going to talk about the central nervous system. Central nervous system को सुनते ही हमको लगता है कि there will be some very tough topics to be discussed. It's not tough. It's the orientation which we need to be corrected. So I will have a series of lectures on CNS continuously. So first of all, today we are going to talk about the introduction to central nervous system. So while starting introduction to central nervous system, first of all, we should know how to have orientation in CNS. Some specific names are there which we have already studied while we were learning the terminology of the anatomy. So what are the planes? You can see right now it is horizontal plane, then there will be a coronal section, there will be a sagittal section. You can see the coronal section like this. Coronal section means we are going to cut the brain from the dorsal to ventral. Slide will be looking like this. Then you can see the sagittal section, it will be from anterior to posterior. It means you're going to see the medial surface in this particular section. Then there are certain directions like caudal and rostral, then dorsal and ventral, then superior and inferior, then anterior and posterior. So these are some names which we are going to see when we are going to talk about this particular CNS. So what is actually cerebral cortex? Cerebral cortex means the covering of the entire surface of brain overlying the deep nuclei. The cortex together with deep nuclei is going to be called as forebrain. If you see here, it's forebrain can be divided into two parts, telencephalon and diencephalon. Telencephalon means cerebral hemisphere and deep structures. Diencephalon means thalamus, hypothalamus, and subthalamus. And simply remember, anything related to thalamus will be connected with the diencephalon, and other parts will be from telencephalon. Next, how this particular cortex is made up of? Because it is having big surface area, so in that small skull, it is kept within very much too much folds are there, and due to these folds, some ridges are formed which are known as gyri. You can see in green color, and some sulci are formed. You can see this type. They are furrows. So major sulci are given names. Large sulci are also called as fissure, like you can see central sulcus and lateral fissure. Gyri are the based on their function or their location. Basically on their location you will see it. Then sulci, there are many ways to describe and classify. So one of them is to know the sulci. So sulci are the delineating boundaries of lobes. When we talk about lobes, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, so usko separate kaun kar raha hai? They are the sulci. So only major sulci are been named, not all. So you can see this is central sulcus, this is frontal lobe, parietal lobe. Then you can see lateral sulcus, parietal, frontal and temporal lobe downside. And there is one imaginary type which is not directly, it is parieto-occipital sulcus. As the name suggests, it separates the parietal and occipital lobes. The parieto-occipital sulcus is only visible on the medial side. You can then draw a line along the lateral side to delineate the occipital lobe. As such, there is no real this sulcus. Then when we talk about the lobes, as the color says, everything is clear. Lobes which are divided with the basis of the sulci only. You can see frontal lobe, occipital lobe on the back, posterior lobe in the middle, parietal lobe, temporal lobe on the lower side. This whole thing is cortex. Then when you see the medial surface, that is sagittal section, you are going to get some more things clearly. Frontal lobe already done, occipital lobe already done, parietal lobe, temporal lobe. Now a limbic lobe is there. This limbic lobe will be further divided, but right now you can understand there is a limbic lobe. Then there is a central sulcus, parieto-occipital sulcus. This thing where my cursor is rotating right now, it is corpus callosum, a type of association fibers, which is going to connect the both the sides of the cortex. Now talking about the limbic one, this is only visible in the medial aspect, I have already told. And it consists of cingulate gyrus, which is on the top side of the corpus callosum, and one parahippocampal gyrus, which is on the lower side to the diencephalon part. Next, we can see the gray and white matter. Gray matter mostly consists of neuronal cell bodies, and white matter mostly consists of myelinated axons. You might have already studied this part. In brain, the cortical band consists of gray matter and lies external to the white matter. In spinal cord, white matter surrounds the spinal core of gray matter. So there is some difference which we have to understand. Where exactly is the gray matter and white matter? You can see this is spinal cord slice. White matter is outside, gray matter is inside. This is brain slide or part of coronal part of brain. Here white matter is inside and gray matter is outside. Now coming to the brainstem, we are not going in detail of anything because this is just an introductory part. We'll talk topic by topic in detail afterwards. So brainstem has three parts: rostral to caudal, midbrain, pons, and medulla. And the cerebrum is located on the posterior substrate of brainstem, just behind the pons and the fourth ventricle. So you can see the midbrain, pons, medulla, and then on the posterior surface of brainstem there is cerebellum. Anterior brainstem in dissection what look like. So in midbrain there are some parts which you can identify directly. That is cerebral peduncles, memory bodies, and optic nerve. In pons is very simple to identify in dissection. Then in medulla part there are two parts, pyramids and olives. So you can see the pyramid part and the olive part. This is for the dissection. For the illustration, we can see more clear cerebral peduncles. Now you can see that thing. Memory bodies, optic nerve. The cross thing is optic chiasma. Then the pons, then pyramid, olives. Now we'll go to the posterior brainstem. From the posterior side, how it looks. So in the dissection, you can see in the midbrain part, you can identify the superior collicus, inferior collicus. In the pons, you can identify superior cerebral peduncle, middle cerebral peduncle, and inferior cerebral peduncle. These are connections to cerebellum actually from pons. Then in the medulla part, you can see from fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracialis, and opex. And the last, in between the pons and medulla, you can see the cerebral or fourth ventricle. Again, I will show you everything. So this is posterior part of the brainstem, consisting same three things: midbrain, pons, and medulla. In midbrain, you can see superior collicus, inferior collicus. In pons, you can see superior cerebral peduncle, middle cerebral peduncle, and inferior cerebral peduncle. You can understand these three parts will help to join or connection with the cerebellum part. Then in the medulla, that is lower part, you can see fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracilis, then obex, and in between pons and medulla, you can get the fourth ventricle. In illustrative model, you can identify it again: superior collicus, inferior, superior cerebral peduncle, middle cerebral peduncle, inferior cerebral peduncle, fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracialis, opex, then fourth ventricle. Next, coming to the ventricular system. Ventricle systems are actually spaces within the brain that are the cerebrospinal series, actually produced by the epidermis cells of the choroid, which lines the ventricles. The ventricles acts as an important landmark, helping to grasp the spatial relationship between them, and they are highlighted in blue in this 3D reconstruction diagram. I will play it again. You can see the blue structure. These are all the ventricular system. These are channels in which the CSF is going to flow, and they are present in the middle part basically of the cortex region. Ventricle system consists of two C-shaped lateral ventricles. Each lateral ventricle has three parts: posterior horn, inferior horn, and anterior horn. There is a third ventricle in midline, and the fourth ventricle between the cerebellum and brainstem, as we have seen previously, connected to third ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct. You can see this is lateral ventricle, anterior horn, posterior horn, and inferior horn. Then the cerebral aqueduct, which is connecting between the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. Then you can see the fourth ventricle directly, and then the third one. Now, if you want to revise something about CSF. So CSF is secreted by ependymal cells, that is a type of epithelium of choroid plexus, which is found in all four ventricles. They are lined by the ependymal cells. At the certain location, the ependyma pia complex invaginates into the ventricles together with capillaries traveling in the subarachnoid spaces. Here, the ependymal cell layer becomes a cuboidal epithelium, the choroid epithelium, and becomes the secretory. So CSF move from lateral to third to fourth and push back along by the newly formed CSF. CSF flows into the central canal of the spinal cord and flows out of the fourth ventricle through a very famous foramina Lusaka, and one central foramina of Magendie into the subarachnoid space. CSF moves through the subarachnoid space until it reaches the arachnoid granulations of villi. Subarachnoid, then the movement across the arachnoid villi is passive, driven by the difference in the hydrostatic pressure between CSF and subarachnoid space and venous blood in the superior sagittal sinus. So this is small introduction about the CSF. Now, we can go further. We can summarize all the things what we have done till now. Central system is of brain and spinal cord. The cerebral cortex is highly folded, mostly in gyri, data ridges, and sulci data furrows. This cortex can be described and classified in many ways, dividing into major lobes along with important sulcus. The 5 key lobes are frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and limbic lobe. The brain stem can also be divided into the regions, including midbrain, pons, and medulla, that is brain stem. In the brain gray matter, the accumulation of cell body is located in the cortical band on the surface as well as deep structure in the forebrain. In contrast, the spinal cord, the gray matter is located centrally and surrounded by white matter. Then there is a ventricular system. A fluid-filled space within the brain consists of 2 lateral ventricles, each with an inferior, posterior, and anterior horn. Then there is third ventricle and cerebral equator connecting third to the fourth. And finally, the brain can be sectioned into numerous planes, including coronal, horizontal, and sagittal plane. So this all was the little bit introduction about the central nervous system. In next lectures, we are going to talk about one by one about each of the part of CNS. Thank you.